Hey, it's Matt. This is my friend Aaron, and this is our fifth conversation about the book of Ephesians. Kind of a different format than what I normally do, but this has been really fun so far. So if you haven't caught the previous 1, 2, 3, however many, 4 installments, you can go check those out. Especially that first one's going to set you up to understand all of this a little better. And we're going to tune you out in just a minute and have a conversation like normal people and see what we get out of it.
No, you're good.
That actually made it more fun.
Oh, I didn't even know that came out in here.
No, and actually, if you just want to you can just wander through here as many times. It makes it better. It makes it seem like we have friends. Thank you for helping with the illusion. We're talking about Ephesians 4. I'm Matt. That's Aaron. Here we go. Okay, so we've been talking about how we're going to turn the corner here between chapter 3 and chapter 4 from this big picture stuff into more like, okay, so what do you do with it kind of stuff?
So now what?
What would the 30-second wrap-up on the first 3 chapters sound like? And go.
30 seconds. God has a plan from beginning to end, and he started it before creation began, and it all involves all of us individually, specifically designated for certain roles, chosen out of darkness being brought into light to play a role in his plan to bring all things under the lordship of Christ.
That was 23 seconds. Okay, you're good at stuff. I'm going to go with my version in 2, 1, 0. Paul's given the big picture explanation of everything to say that God's been doing all this stuff and you are a product of great effort and forethought. And therefore you matter and you have a purpose. And God orchestrated all that stuff. So since you matter, you need to understand that you are a part not just of an individual who gets to do stuff to be useful in the grand scheme of this story, but also you're a part of a new people that God has made for this whole thing. 27 seconds.
Okay.
I probably rushed that a little bit and made it worse than it should have been because I wanted to see if I could do it faster than you.
That's all right.
So what we found is that on these first 3 chapters, we're a lot on the same page on a lot of these things.
Yep.
And there's a few things that clearly we've developed little catchphrases and ways to talk about that make sense in our brains. But this is where I think sometimes you see the paths divide. In the first 3 chapters, we spent a lot of time on the predestination, free will thing because everybody has reads on that.
Can't ignore it.
Yep. But other than that, I think most people who read this and would say they're roughly Christian-ish would see most of it the same way. Here we get into the behavioral stuff. Mm-hmm. What do you do? How do you treat people? How do you talk about stuff? And it gets friskier. So I'm interested to see where we come down on this and if we're reading it the same way. So for everybody watching and listening, we are not going to read the whole thing. So if you want to pause it and read Ephesians chapter 4, that might be a useful move now. If not, you'll get the idea as we go along. So, Aaron, we've rounded the corner from big picture ideas into what do you do with it stuff. What do you see as being the structure of chapter 4? What are we supposed to do based on this?
Well, structure, I don't know if I would give it a single structure.
My question was stupid.
I didn't say that. I don't know. I just said I haven't figured it out. I just, off the top of my head at least, he starts out, okay, so I want you to live this way. Therefore, I'm reminding you, I'm a prisoner of the Lord. Walk in a manner worthy. So then he starts with the community. So being humble, being gentle, being patient, bear with one another in love, and then he moves on and talks about we all have oneness, one baptism, one faith, one Lord, and all one God and Father is over all of us. So we're all in this together, so treat one another well, right? Now, you and I have been around church long enough, we know that isn't always the case, but
yeah, and it's not always everybody else's fault either. Like I
Sure.
I've made my dents. So, okay, 2 things on this then.
Mm-hmm.
One, and maybe it's just a quick side thing. What do you make of the language "a prisoner for the Lord"? Do you think he was actually in jail when he wrote this thing?
Mm-hmm. That's the general consensus. It doesn't
in jail
seem like well, that's a question. Nobody knows where, because he was in jail a couple of different times.
Okay, he's in jail in Philippi. In Acts 16.
Yes.
He's in jail in Jerusalem in Acts 21, 22, somewhere in there.
Right.
And we know he's in jail in Rome.
At the end of Acts.
Mm-hmm. What am I forgetting?
There's ones in Caesarea as well.
Okay, so that's a lot of jail.
These are a lot of jail.
Writing from Caesarea doesn't make a ton of sense.
That's the question: was this the Roman imprisonment or was it the Caesarea imprisonment? That's generally the consensus.
Really?
I think that.
Okay, I'm a big idiot.
Now you told me not to review my notes.
Yeah.
So I'm like trying to pull this off the top of my head. So
Which makes it more fun because then we can screw it up and we
Yeah.
can just hide behind that.
yeah, well, it's good. It's good. So I think it's probably Rome, even though it's.
That's what I hear most.
That's
but
what you hear the most. Some people say no, it can't be from Rome because it's too far to travel back and forth for letters and things. But
There's your
that
nachos.
seems
Gracias.
to make the most sense.
They're nachos. Keep talking.
That's
I'm going to spill these on my Bible and make this disgusting Bible even worse. And I don't even feel bad about it. And I'm going to eat in such a way that everybody can hear me eating because of that sweet microphone.
very good.
Okay, so you read that as literal. He's a prisoner at this time when he's writing.
Yeah,
You think that's what he's driving at?
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be consistent with him because he drops stuff like that throughout. Like he wants people to know this is costly.
Yes.
And I don't think it's just bragging, although he says he's allowed to brag about that.
Yes, it's
think
more
he's-
than that. You can tell that he's trying to put a clear picture of this is what this costs. This is what I want you to do, and I'm not afraid to go there myself. It's not so much that he's bragging, it's that he's just being honest about what it takes to be a follower of Christ. And this is, follow me as I follow Christ, he says in another place. And this is what it looks like. It also gives him a certain credibility. Like, remember,
Huge credibility.
I'm not asking you to do anything I haven't done myself, and I'm willing to pay the cost for it. So
Thank you, because this is going to get sloppy.
Yeah, that's
I appreciate it. These are good. The it's like a white cheese stuff. You really should hit a couple of those. It's good. The other thing about these first, how many is this? 5 verses or 6 verses? Is like, if you made a top 10 list of stuff that matters you just keep making it better. I'm going to scrape out the bottom. If you make a top 10 list of stuff that matters in Christianity, or if you ask people to make a top 10 list, I don't think get along, be in unity would crack the top 10 for most people. I think it'd be
that's
like,
interesting.
what are the things everybody obsesses about? Like, it's be some sex stuff,
Yeah.
and probably some more sex stuff, and like don't have sex like that. Make sure it's not like that kind of sex, gross. And then probably swears, and then
Some people might add beer,
beer.
whatever.
Don't swear while drinking beer and having sex. Like, that's actually printed on the wall in front of our church. It's like in calligraphy. It's really lovely. There's a picture of an eagle next to it. This is the worst yet. So I just think it's kind of wild that Paul is going to go into this long list of like, hey, because it is like this, it means that you need to be this. And he leads
The place he starts with
unity in the body.
unity and treat people well.
Treat people well. Huh.
And we joked about it, but that can be so hard for people to get.
There are people watching this right now who can think tangibly of things that I have done that does not involve treating them well. So of course,
Yeah.
I mean, first-hand experience.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to get right.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that we don't intend to, but hopefully we'll go back and say, I'm sorry.
Hopefully.
The stuff I'm thinking of is, where people refuse to go back and own it and
Yeah.
say, no, I was justified in treating you poorly.
Yeah, and it's going to speak to that more here later in this chapter even. Why do you think, why does it make sense to lead with unity coming off of what we just looked at in the first 3 chapters?
Well, he said we're all part of the story. We're all being brought into the same story, right? You were following the ways of this world, and in that, thinking you were serving yourself, you were serving Satan. And as you did all that, God drew us all out from our different corners and made us one family for His glory. And if we don't live like one family, then He doesn't get the glory.
There you go. Yeah, I'm with you. I think this introduces a concept that we're going to see rounded out in Ephesians 6 with the whole armor of God thing that we're going to get to, about you can't do this alone. You, as one person, cannot fulfill what God is going for. Because part of what God is doing to point out that he's really cool is that he can put things together that otherwise wouldn't go together.
And
He can equalize that and make it work.
And make it work where nobody else could. And he can make you do things that, if it were just up to you, you couldn't do.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can have...
Everybody knows for sure that that was beyond that. That was beyond Aaron.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think as we get further along, we're going to see like what's the common thread in all of these. All this stuff that he talks about us doing differently or thinking differently about, it just keeps coming back to, I can't do that without doing right by other people. I can't do this one without being at peace with other people.
This is kind of foundational.
What's coming over the next 2.5 chapters is a call to emotional maturity that I aspire to, but I'd lump myself in with most people. I don't think most people get this right. I think if people did this in principle, it would change the church, it would change the world, it would change everything. This is revolutionary stuff. It's not a nitpicky list of dumb little preferences. This is all of these instructions that are going to come next are all very aware and very in keeping with this idea of unity and doing right by other people.
Yeah, and the thing is, it isn't like go to your in-laws and enjoy the birthday party and get along with them for the afternoon and then drive 3 hours home. This is over and over and over, bearing with one another in love. That bearing with that's heavy language. That's putting up with
It's
each
literally
other.
heavy language.
Yeah.
Because bearing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of the point, isn't it?
It's
This will cost
putting
you something
up
to
with
do right.
Yes. This could be uncomfortable for you. It might be unpleasant. It might be irritating.
What are you saying about your in-laws?
I love my in-laws.
Oh, okay. I was just checking because as an example you brought up, I didn't know for sure.
It's kind of a proverbial.
Like, if I were to pick the ideal place to offer such a complaint,
Yeah.
this would be it. So I just assumed.
Yeah.
But no, now I understand better. Yeah, and this language about one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Wow. Do you think denominations are a bad idea in light of that?
Well, I don't think they're a great idea. I don't know that was ever the intention. I don't know. It's hard to say. We've said God plans all things, makes all things happen. Is there unity? Can we have unity? Maybe a better way to think about it is, in spite of our denominational disagreements, can we still have unity? So in other words, could you look at a macro picture and say, well, these people don't agree on all the doctrinal pieces, right? But can they still be unified together? I'll give you an example. In our community, we have a ministerial group, and the churches work together. We do some services throughout the year. We do a Bible study in the local jail where we each take turn. We pray together every Tuesday, and we really have a very healthy working relationship together as churches. Now, theologically, there's some wide divergences in the way we go about preaching, the way we structure our services, the way that we do church in general.
What kind of snakes you handle?
Exactly. Are they poisonous or are they just garter snakes?
Well, if it's a garter snake, I don't even see how that illustrates the point.
Right.
Not
So
you're faithless.
But we get along well. So from a macro perspective, does the fact that there is diversity and still unity? Because unity is not sameness, and that comes up here. So what it comes down to in the next section then, beginning in verse 9, he talks about giving spiritual gifts. And some have this, some have this, some have this. And so unity is not sameness. So we always seem like denominations aren't a great idea, they're kind of blight, and certainly the way they're typically played out is not good. Perhaps it's not all bad.
I'm with you there.
Perhaps there's something in the sovereign plan of God that makes that appealing when you can see, again, in our church we have a congregational church, we have it's a Church of God, they're kind of Pentecostal, we have an Assemblies of God, we have a Nazarene church, there's a Lutheran church that participates, pretty diverse group. We're Baptists, at our church, so it's a big, we all, every week, just get together, we pray for one another and work together, and it's good. It really is. So we started doing, in our community, we do a service. We started it with the town centennial. We did a citywide worship service on a Sunday morning where we would intentionally lay aside. That was 2 years ago. So we've done it 3 years in a row now. So we would lay aside our Sunday morning services for the purpose of worshiping together as a church. Mm-hmm. So everything all right there in your...
Yeah, I was just checking to make sure that we were talking loud enough. We might be being too quiet. So you can just yell at me more.
All right, I'll do that. Okay. So that to me that's what Jesus prayed for in John 17, that they might be one. So the fact that there's not sameness, but there's oneness, I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that's the objective too. I'm a bit contrarian on this. I like denominations. Thank you. I think they're great because I think they do exactly what they say they do. They denominate. Mm-hmm. If you want to do religion that feels like this, let me tell you, that church right there will tend to be like that. Go to it, and then don't fight, because you're in a church with a bunch of people who you think about stuff the same way as. Mm-hmm. But if you like to be this kind of person, mm-hmm. but you want to go to that brand of church, well, why would you do that? You're taking all your ideas that don't fit over there at all. You're trying to cram them in. That's just you're just picking a fight for no reason. Mm-hmm. So I think the rings of trust thing kind of works. You can have that inner circle of people with whom you agree so resolutely on stuff that you can functionally partner together day in and day out, even on a whim. Mm-hmm. Then you got that next ring where you're like, hey, we're fine. We don't necessarily share a house, but we can completely work together, and we give each other a little bit of space because of these few preferences, and there's no reason to fight that out. Whatever, it's fine. We got two churches. Then you got the further ring where it's like, okay, well, if we're talking about is there a God? Or are we pretty sure Jesus is the Son of God? That we could partner on that. We disagree so stoutly on everything else, and it's so functionally different. Mm-hmm. There's just no reason to try and cram it together. Mm-hmm. It's going to cause friction.
Yeah.
And then you got the people, and I won't be specific, but with whom I would say, at this point, that's functionally a completely different religion. Yeah. And I don't hate you, I'm not bad. Mm-hmm. I can't partner up on any level.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work, save completely a-religious, just doing good, like feeding the poor or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I actually think more net unity comes from having peace in churches where there are little smaller pockets and some awareness that there are other people, going to church same time you are on a Sunday morning. You should be rooting for them too. Mm-hmm. I think the root for each other from a little bit of a distance thing can actually be super productive. Mm-hmm. And I think if we didn't do that, because of the nature of the way God did the whole Bible thing, all we'd ever do is fight about which one of these views is right, and with the hopes of eventually trying to wear each other down and getting to this place where we've arrived at the one correct opinion, which I think would be awful for the church and the world and totally counterproductive anyway.
Yeah. When I worked through these passages, I hadn't thought of it in terms of that question of denominations, but I think you're right. That's kind of an offshoot.
It seemed fun to hit up, because a lot of people would say, if you don't all go to church together, you're failing this passage.
Yeah, not necessarily so. You may be failing, and but it's not necessarily because you're worshiping.
You also may be failing just in the same church.
Yeah, totally.
We both know very well it's very possible to be very disunified in the same church.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's crap. That's a worse feeling, isn't it? going to church
Yeah,
and
it's,
knowing, like, hey,
It's a lousy feeling.
I got issues with so-and-so, and they got issues with me. We do this thing with communion where at our church, when we take the bread, half of communion, we think about, we reflect on the whole Jesus cross salvation thing. When we take the cup, we reflect on hey, we are taking this as a group. Why is that? What does that mean? If you got stuff outstanding between you and God during the bread thing, like, you might want to just mentally work that out in prayer, whatever you do.
Mm-hmm.
If you have stuff outstanding with another person, you might just want to make a commitment in your brain that you're not going to let the sun go down on that. You're going to work it out. And that taking that cup even is a way of saying, I
All right.
value unity
Okay.
and communion,
Yeah, that's interesting.
and I will show up to make that right and square up accounts as best as it's up to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think nothing's perfect, but I think
Yeah.
it's an effective way to keep that in front of people, keep that in front of myself
Yeah, I like that.
every month.
Yeah, that's good. When I preach through these texts, I made that one of the main points. Like, okay, sort of everything done, explained it all. Now, some of you people have people you don't like. Some of you are mad at somebody. Some of you were hurt. You feel somebody owes you an apology. I'm telling you, this week you need to go. I don't know if anybody took me up on it or not.
Oh man, there's not a lot of things where I'll get all
Yeah.
table pounding and like, hey, we got to do this, guys. But this one is top of the list for me. People are going to get addicted to stuff. They're going to do stupid crap. They're going to get in trouble. They're going to make mistakes. I don't know. I feel like we can be patient and work with all of that. But those malicious mistakes where you're trying to tear somebody else up or ruin things in somebody else's life, can't put up with that.
Or ruin things in the church's
That's different.
life.
That's different. You can't put up with that.
Yeah.
And you got to push people all the time. You got to push yourself all the time. Say, look, we're part of something bigger. You just got to drop it. And sometimes that might even mean that you have a legitimate gripe, and you just got to drop it, which is not my strong suit. But you go through and add up, and you remember this because we talked about it. I had my little notebook out a few years ago, and we were looking at it together. You went through and added up what Jesus' priorities were based on what he talked about most. And this unity thing was way high on the list in terms of things he really talked about
Talks a
and
lot.
cared about. And then he prays for future believers one time, right? In John 17.
Yep.
And
So I was just
you know the
gonna point
answer.
out,
What
yeah.
does he, well, go right ahead. What does he pray for?
Well, that they be one, that we are one, so that the world may know that you have sent me.
In other words, if we Christians can show to the world that God is real and has done something remarkable by setting aside our stupid stuff in the interest of something bigger, because that just doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
And conversely, if we can't do that, it makes it seem like the whole thing is a joke.
Right. We're hiding the gospel.
And it feels like a joke. On a Sunday or a church, you're singing a song or looking at the Bible, and you have garbage outstanding with somebody else. Like the whole thing just feels like a fraud. At least it does to me when I'm in that boat. So, he's going to give this list that you referenced about the like spiritual gifts and whatnot. Does this come up somewhere else? I feel like this comes up somewhere else in the Bible
It comes up
too.
a couple other places, especially Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. But here it's interesting. So he says, he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. So the four listed there, and you can debate whether there are four or five. It seems like shepherds and teachers or pastors and teachers are linked together grammatically. So it seems like there's four there. They're all groups of leadership,
Equipping.
and
kind of
they're
things.
all ministries of the word.
That makes sense.
So the four offices or the four roles that he lists there, apostles, prophets, evangelists, and shepherd teachers, are all a ministry of the word. The way they execute their ministry is by proclaiming or teaching or explaining either the Bible or the message of the gospel or something. The other thing that they do is they're all gifts of leadership, or they have in common is they're all gifts of leadership, and they're all geared towards preparing the average person for the work of the ministry.
Which would make sense that Paul would want to hit that real hard if he knows he's never coming back.
Whether at this point he's never coming back to this place or not, he'll say that in Acts 20. We don't know if this letter was before or after that point.
Fair point.
But either way, yes, that's exact. He knows he's not going to be there forever. Now look at this. This is interesting.
Okay, go ahead.
Until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And again, that's one of those phrases in Ephesians where the language kind of piles up on itself to be a little bit redundant, over the top to make the point. But the leaders prepare the people to do the ministry, or the whole group is not fully mature in Christ. That's pretty significant. So we started out, we said, you have a part to play in this in the first half. And part of what's making that, he said in Ephesians 2:10, you're saved by grace to do good works, which God prepared in advance for you to do. And he's saying here again, you have a specific role to play in helping everyone else come to maturity. Not just so you're mature, but so that everybody else is mature.
And then the payoff there is that you won't be a sucker for every dumb idea that comes down the pike.
That comes along here,
And
yes.
clearly he would have had in view the idea of well-meaning people who had dumb ideas and destructive ideas, and also wolves from
Conniving
within.
people who have bad ideas.
Yeah, and he warns them about that as well in that goodbye in Acts 20 or 21, wherever it is.
It's 20.
20? Okay.
Yep. Yes, is rather than falling for deceitful schemes, speak the truth in love to one another. Grow up in every way into Christ who's the head. And that's language again from chapter 1, where Jesus is listed as the head over all things for the glory of God and for the benefit of the church.
So, telling the truth in this sense isn't just something you do in love, it is loving.
Yes,
Yeah. And
you have ketchup on your face.
what do I got?
Tell people.
Is it?
It's embarrassing to know, but
it?
yeah,
Yeah, right. So,
or worse.
or worse. So what you've got then is that it wraps up with this language about the body being held together. And so the idea is that these gifts, and obviously this is not the comprehensive list of all the gifts, it's just a specific type
Yes.
that were important at this moment because they needed fresh leaders and because there were threats coming into the church. But that when this happens, and you've got people who can refresh and reiterate what Paul just explained in chapters 1, 2, and 3, the big picture, the point, then the body is healthy because they're not suckers for every religious idea that comes along. They're not as prone to fall for dumb things.
Yes.
That's pretty vicious language. You won't be infants any longer, tossed back and forth by the waves. That's
not make you feel good language.
Uh-uh.
In other words, if you're not with me, you're still an infant. Yeah.
And so the idea here is again that there is a trajectory. You got this beginning point, which is the knowledge of how things are. And you got this next beginning point, which is God doing this thing in your life. Then you got this next beginning point, or the next point, which is, hey, I got stuff I'm supposed to do. And this next point is like moving toward maturity, or whatever that looks like. And this has been fairly practical. Like, so far we've got in chapter 4, be unified, and that's going to take work, and you're going to have to invest in that.
And you might not like it.
Yeah, and then we've got the you got to invest in each other thing,
Right.
with actual truth and love. Then it seems like you get into stuff that's a little more into the realm of the mind and the existential self. Who am I? What do I think? Starting in verse 17.
Okay.
What do you make of the phrase, don't live, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. Is that just a racial slight because Paul is Jewish and doesn't like Gentiles?
Remember, there's something packed into that phrase. What he means by that.
You were supposed to just be like, no.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry. No.
Okay.
No, what he means is, I'm trying to remember that what's packed into that language. I think the idea that the futility is of no purpose. So what he's laid out here is there's a purpose to all this. History's going somewhere. Your life is going somewhere. Your life matters. And the futility of their minds, or the futility of their thinking, is the idea that they're just chasing one experience after another.
And there's no story, which really kind of runs headlong into a lot of the intellectual friction even of our day in the last 100 years.
Yes.
Is there an overarching story or is there not?
Mm-hmm.
This thing that we don't know what to call, that we call postmodernism until we think of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the central tenet of this view of truth and ideas and the human experience is that there is no overarching story. Every other movement in the history of Western thought has been, the overarching story is this.
Mm-hmm.
The overarching story is this. And now it's just rejectionism, a kind of nihilism. And I'm not saying I want to pick a fight with every tenet of postmodernism. I think there are things that are profoundly Christian or adaptable toward Christian faith in postmodernism. But
it lacks a cohesiveness.
It lacks a cohesiveness.
Yes, and I think if we understand that, I try to talk about that a lot in my preaching. That if we get that, it makes sense to us. I mean, that's what Paul's doing, right? In this very systematic letter. He's laying
out a story.
He's laying out a narrative that holds the whole thing together, and how my life fits into that, and it gives it meaning. We have a tremendous opportunity as Christians to do the same thing. If we can explain that the gospel isn't just sort of a cosmic exchange between you and Jesus, and you say this little private prayer, and things are good, and you move on. The gospel is an explanation of life, and it gives all of life meaning, and it directs it. It gives direction to it, I should say. And when we can explain that to people, all of a sudden, my life makes sense now. All my failures, God can redeem. All the evil things people did to me, God can redeem and use. Who I am and how I thought I was a mistake, and whatever things we struggle with, right? Fill in the blank. All of that, all of a sudden, has meaning. And when we can understand that as Christians and then communicate that to other people, I think it has the power to connect, particularly in our postmodern context. People are really lacking those things.
Yeah.
People are looking for meaning, and when we can step in and say, hey, this is what it looks like.
So this is... So we have a contrast statement, and everything moving forward from here until we're told otherwise is going to be a contrast. It's going to be, you got this old way of thinking.
Right.
And if there is no point other than morality by consensus and just get through things, then you just get yours. And if that means getting over on a few people to get yours, then that's what you got to do. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever. It's understandable if there's nothing. But Paul said, look, there's something. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of evidence to support that there's something, and if there is, then let's just game out what it looks like to actually live in a way that's consistent with that. So, what do we have in terms of... Can we get past the critique of the broken way of thinking that Paul's pushing back against?
Callous, giving themselves up to sensuality. So it's the picture here to me is like your proverbial student at university who just kind of lives throughout the weekend or throughout the week just to get to the weekend to have another experience. I know that's not the vast majority of college students, but they're out there. We all know. We've been around students. You know that what's
sure.
I went to class with people like that. I worked with people like that when I was a waiter at a restaurant in college. That's how they're out there. So just think of that stereotype, and that's the picture. You just kind of become desensitized, and you're just looking for the next experience.
Well, and I can say this, like, I've lived a decent amount like that. I'm not even prepared to totally criticize it. Like, life can become mundane. I get that impulse to say, you kind of have this next thing that gives you hope or meaning, that you can't wait to experience this or have this kind of fun or see this thing, whatever it might be. But I also know that just gets hollow. That there's something that happens after you've been going back to the well again and again to just experience your way through a season in life, and then suddenly it stops working, and you've got this epiphany, this there's got to be something more moment.
Yeah.
I think whether you're religious or a Christian or anything, people arrive at that and they know when they're there, and that's when we kind of mix things up. But it seems like what Paul is saying is you can mix it up all you want. Ultimately, there's one thing that is designed to scratch that itch.
Yep. You didn't learn Christ this way.
You seriously not going to do any of these?
What's that?
You're not going to? No, nothing?
No, I'm good. I'm all right.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
It's so many nachos. I'm sorry I cut you off, but
okay.
The nachos got to go.
Yeah, so then he gets into some specifics. He says, put away falsehood, speak truth with your neighbor, because we're members of one body. Be angry, but don't sin. Don't give an opportunity to the devil. Don't steal, but participate, have something to contribute to the community. No corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only what's good for building others up.
Okay, we got to
That
talk
can
about
give
that one.
grace.
Just a second. It's my last nacho bite.
Okay.
That's how many nachos I wanted exactly.
So giving grace.
So it's interesting. The chapter starts with how to have unity with people. Then it explains like we all got different gifts, and we want to be rooted and grounded in this truth that I'm explaining to you. And we don't want to be the opposite of that, which is grounded in nothing and tossed about. And it comes right back to, so tell the truth. Don't screw people over. If something goes wrong, you need to square that up before it gets dark. And I don't sense that's a necessarily literal thing, but it's what I shoot for. It's what I encourage
It's
people
not
to
always
shoot
possible to get it done before it's dark, but I mean, the point is, do it quickly.
for. Yeah, not like you have a right to a speedy trial, which might be a decade or so. But get to it, because, and that language of don't give the devil a foothold, it is so that's what happens
So that-
when you let stuff fester, when you stew and you pace back, and I don't mean you, because I do this sometimes, right?
Well, we do.
When I fester and I pace back and forth and I process it out and think in my brain or talk to my wife about this situation or how that is, it does not get better. There is one person who holds the keys to that getting better, and it's the person I got the issue with. And I've known this since I was like 5. And when I get it right, life just works. Relationships work.
Tension, it just kind of goes like this.
It melts.
Yeah, but
When I don't, every day that I don't get it right, it just seems like something unfolds. There's a little bit more dug in. I got somebody right now who I just really need to call. They haven't wronged me, but it's a weird situation. I just need to call. And every day that I continue to not call, it gets so much harder to call, because now it's a thing. And when I do call, I probably should knock that out like tonight. It's going to be weird. But I could have made it not weird by just tackling it. That's smart, practical advice. So I would say for the person listening to this who even rejects everything else, like that one's worth considering.
yeah. So the thing there is, if you've rejected it, take that advice. That's good. But for a religious person, look at what it says. Because don't give the devil a foothold in your life. Don't give the devil an opportunity in your life. So holding on to that is not a neutral thing.
It's destructive.
It's destructive, and it opens a gateway of evil into your life. And like you said, a lot of times we have the key to that. There's other stuff that can be done to us. It's not always our fault, but we very often hold the key to making that reconciliation happen.
Yeah, and as much as it's up to you, be at peace with everybody, right?
Yep. And that's
So see, you've got this principle that, I mean, what do these things have in common? Don't wrong people. And if you do somehow, or you get crossways, or maybe it was nobody's fault, you just get after it. Here, because something big and important is in play, get after it.
bigger than you.
Way bigger.
Bigger than you and your
pride.
grudges. Bigger
Yeah.
than you and your
Yeah.
the whatever.
Easy
wrong
to
that's
say
been
sitting
done to
here,
you.
hard to get right when it's your thing.
Totally.
Because
Totally.
people. But then it hits this one,
God's
and
people.
verse 29, that don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. I have heard that verse as somebody who's gone to a Christian school, and then another Christian school, and then more Christian schools, as somebody who's had a Christian job, as somebody who went to a Christian college, as somebody who went to camp, I have heard the first half of that verse about 11 billion times. I almost never hear the second half of that verse. So often, that is the verse that's used to say, society decided there are swears. And swears are bad, Aaron. There are roughly 7 of them. George Carlin picked them out and told us, because as Christians we wouldn't want to make that list ourselves, we wouldn't have to actually say those words, which would be gross and obviously evil because of the first half of this verse. Pay no attention to the second half behind the curtain. This is one of those, I think this is the verse where the person reading this is tempted to switch gears from, wow, this is grace-giving, awe-inspiring, change the way I see the world kind of stuff, to...
Okay, so I can't remember which episode it was here, early in the beginning of this. But we're not defined by what we do.
What are we defined by?
What Jesus did. We're defined by his work in our life. Now, what we do is not unimportant. But when we come to those, and let's be honest, well-intending, typically, right?
Okay, I'll give you 50-50.
All right.
You're talking about people who make
the
rules
list.
out of a verse like that.
Yeah.
Who enhance the Bible by giving you the unspoken list.
Yeah.
Hey, this might not be clear enough.
So
here are the words. I'll write them down with little dashes in there, so I didn't write the words.
So
but you
maybe
know
it's
what
a little
word
condescending,
I
but
mean.
what they're trying to do is make it achievable, so we can all do it. We're not. You gotta let that go. I mean, we can't ignore your speech, or whatever. It just shouldn't be just.
It just shouldn't
profane.
be motivated by don't arbitrarily make 7 sounds. It should be motivated by, the second half of that verse, it never gets read.
Builds others up and gives grace.
So that's in keeping with everything else in the book.
Right.
So in other words, here's another way to put it. Your words should reflect all these things. If you agree on this, your words and how you talk to people should reflect
building
that.
people up is helping them grow in their faith. Giving them grace is obviously what? It's an undeserved favor from God. It's a benefit that shows them salvation.
So to get that right means that you are going to have to exercise judgment.
Yeah.
You can't just simply do or not do a thing to get verse 29 right.
Right.
If you want to get it right, you must think. And you must listen, because you have to be aware of your audience. You have to be aware of your context. You have to understand what would make this better and what would make this worse. There are phrases you could say in one setting that would be absolutely edifying and good and a disaster in another.
Yes.
There might be something that it would make infinite sense for you to say to your wife on your anniversary in private that it would not make sense for you to say to your secretary on a Monday at 3 p.m. Same phrase. It's not the phrase, it's prohibited. You know what your relationship is with each of those people in your life, so you just use common sense and judgment so that what would make your wife feel built up and encouraged and loved is used to do that. And then you think of something else that would make sense given this relationship.
Right.
It's just judgment. It's common sense, social sense.
What you're talking about actually comes in the second half of chapter 5, when we're going to get to marriage and family and household relationships.
Smart. Yep, you're right. I'm ruining it.
No, you're all right.
I'm half ruining it. You're the other
teeing it up.
Okay. So what's interesting is that you have this call to judgment. And I would say maybe the most practical instruction in all of this is the one we just looked at about, hey, if this gets crossways with people, square it up right away. It's very practical, very deliberate.
Yes.
But even that requires judgment. And so does the stuff that comes after this. Don't grieve the Holy Spirit, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Paul goes big. He's like, look.
What does that mean?
Well, what do you think it means?
I asked you first.
Jerk. So here's what I see happening. I see what he's saying is, like, if you live as the Gentiles do, being crossways with people, using your words to get crossways with people, having an up yours attitude on all of that, and just letting it bleed out there and letting people hurt, then nothing about any of this has actually affected you or changed you. What are you doing? You're getting it wrong. Oh, you can go ahead, man. No worries. I think we confused that dude. I hope we can be friends with him later, but I'm not sure we're there right now.
He stepped out of the steps.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to wait until the sun gets a little lower, but I'm gonna go talk to him about that. I think what he's saying is this might just seem like words and silly relationships, but it's not anymore.
Yeah.
Stakes are raised. This all matters.
Yeah.
And if you think all this stuff, but it doesn't translate into your relationships, and just how you talk to people, something's broken.
Yeah. And here's what I think: don't grieve the Holy Spirit. Okay, so I think you could cross-reference that with Philippians 2:12. You know, the Spirit of God is at work in you. God, it's God who works in you to will and to act for His good purpose. The sanctification verse, that God is working to make you holy.
So I nodded and was like, like I knew. I totally know.
That's right. So not only did what you said is true, I think if you're not paying attention to how you live in the church and how you relate to people, then you are fighting against the work of God in your life. The Holy Spirit is, if you are part of this family, the Holy Spirit is in the process of trying to help you get better at stuff.
It's weighty stuff.
And if you're fighting against that, you are fighting against God. Don't grieve the Spirit of God. I think that's what it means.
And well, I guess I just muttered it a second ago, but it's weighty stuff. It's next level stuff.
Yeah.
And I understand how the person coming in on the front end of this could look at that and feel kind of overwhelmed by that. But hey, Paul's easing him in here, and he's acknowledging that there's a process here by which this stuff makes sense and it clicks. Rounding it out, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. All things that could be defined differently by different people in different contexts. Those all require judgment also.
They do.
I could think that you're behaving bitterly after a crushing Nebraska loss. You might feel like you're sad. I can't really judge that. I can't get it right. So it's incumbent on you to think through the invisible parts of your motivations and yourself and try to line them up against all this stuff that you believe and is true, figure out what it ought to look like.
And the sad thing is that I've become too accustomed to crushing Nebraska losses in the last several years.
I'm really sorry. Didn't they lose 4 games on the last play or something last year? They got a Hail Mary twice.
Last year.
Was it BYU that Hail Married Nebraska?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. That's hard. My team last year won the Super Bowl, the championship of football. Of all the football teams on earth, they were the best football team.
That's good.
All right.
That's nice.
I didn't remember. I thought about it, and then I remembered, and I could see how it would.
Sounds good.
If that happens, once every 15, 20 years, I'm good. It makes me a little too happy, and it makes me a little too sad when it doesn't work. All joking aside, it is the silly things like that that really do bring into focus how much you actually believe this.
How much you believe in this?
How much you actually in
How
on this
much
thing.
are you? Yeah.
Yep. Chapter 5 is more of the same. We're going to see this go out from... We're going to get a little more into the social aspects of this. We're going to get a little bit more into the very private, personal aspects of living this out that we kind of got a hint of there at the end.
The second half.
As we get into motives. Yeah. So I'm going to hit pause there because we got another thing coming. So chapter 5 is coming up next. The fast version of this outro is that I'm Matt, and that's Aaron.